A man kneels in the mud, hands bound behind his back with rope. He is blindfolded. Above him stands a Japanese soldier, sword raised, sunlight glinting off the blade. This is not a movie scene. This photograph is real, and it became one of the most haunting images of World War II. His name was Leonard Siffleet, and in the next few minutes, you'll learn exactly why he was forced to his knees, who raised that sword, and what happened in the seconds before and after the blade fell. Stay with me, because the true story is far more disturbing than the photo itself. World War II gave us thousands of photographs. Soldiers charging beaches, cities in ruins, flags being raised on distant hills. But very few images carry the raw, silent horror of one single frozen moment, a man about to die, fully aware of it, seconds from the end. Leonard Siffleet's execution photo did exactly that. It traveled through Japanese hands, was found by American soldiers, and eventually reached the entire world, becoming a symbol of the brutal reality hiding behind the war in the Pacific. But behind that photograph is a young man barely in his mid-20s, a secret mission gone wrong, a betrayal by local tribesmen, and a Japanese commander whose own fate would circle back years later in ways nobody expected. This isn't just a photo. It's a story of espionage, jungle warfare, human fear, and one of history's darkest, yet most human moments. Before we go further into the jungle with Leonard Siffleet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel exists to uncover the darkest, most forgotten corners of history, the stories textbooks skip, the ones that make you feel the past instead of just reading it. If dark history hits different for you, you already know where you belong. Let's continue. Leonard George Siffleet was born in 1916 in New South Wales, Australia. Like thousands of young men of his generation, he wasn't destined for war. He was destined for an ordinary life. But history had other plans. When World War II exploded across the Pacific, Siffleet joined the war effort, eventually becoming a radio operator, a job that sounds harmless. It wasn't. By 1943, the war in New Guinea had become one of the most brutal, disease-ridden, psychologically crushing battlegrounds on Earth. Thick jungle, suffocating heat, enemies you couldn't see until it was too late. Siffleet was assigned to a secret intelligence-gathering mission, deep behind Japanese lines. His job: monitor Japanese troop movements and radio the information back to Allied command. This was a mission with almost no room for error. One mistake, one betrayal, one wrong turn, and there would be no rescue. And that mistake came sooner than anyone expected. Local tribesmen, some cooperating with Japanese forces, whether from fear or persuasion, discovered the small Allied reconnaissance party. What happened next would decide Siffleet's entire fate, because in October 1943, deep in the New Guinea jungle, his mission collapsed completely. He was captured, and what came after his capture was where this story turns from a war mission into something far darker. Leonard Siffleet had been captured deep in the jungles of New Guinea, betrayed, exposed, and now completely alone in enemy hands. But capture was only the beginning of his nightmare. What happened next inside that Japanese camp would decide not just his fate, but the fate of the men standing beside him. And one detail from his final days would later shock even the soldiers who found his body. After his capture, Siffleet wasn't alone. 2 other men were taken with him, Pacific Islander scouts who had been helping the Allied mission. All 3 were marched to a Japanese-held position near Aitape, New Guinea. And here, the psychological horror truly began. These weren't men captured on a battlefield mid-fight. They were intelligence operatives, which, under Japanese military doctrine at the time, meant something far more dangerous than ordinary prisoners of war. Spies were not protected by conventional rules of engagement, and Japanese command in many Pacific regions treated captured intelligence operatives with brutal suspicion, interrogating them for information, then often deciding their fate without trial, without mercy, without warning. For days, Siffleet was likely questioned, malnourished, weakened, far from home, with no way to call for help, no rescue coming, and no idea what was about to unfold. Imagine that isolation, the jungle heat pressing down, the sound of a language you don't understand deciding whether you live or die. And yet, here's something most people don't know. Siffleet, despite his suffering, remained composed. Witnesses and later historical analysis describe him maintaining a quiet, almost eerie calmness in his final days, the kind of dignity that only makes his story hit harder. Then came the order. On October 24, 1943, Siffleet and his two companions were led to a beach near Aitape. Not a battlefield, not a courtroom. A beach, quiet, open, ordinary, turned into an execution ground. He was blindfolded, his hands were bound, he was forced to kneel in the sand, and standing above him was a Japanese officer named Yasuno Chikao, the man who would raise the sword. Here's where the story becomes even more layered, more human, more tragic. Chikao was not some faceless monster invented by propaganda. He was a real officer, operating under real wartime orders, in a system where refusing to execute a spy could mean facing punishment himself. War doesn't just create victims, it creates men trapped inside impossible, morally crushing choices. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it explains the machinery behind it. A system built to strip away hesitation, empathy, even basic humanity. The sword was raised, and in that exact moment, frozen forever, a photograph was taken. Not by the Allies, not by a journalist, by a Japanese soldier standing nearby, documenting the execution for reasons historians still debate today. Was it record-keeping, propaganda, personal memory? Nobody knows for certain, and that mystery is part of what makes this photograph so unsettling. What we do know is this. Seconds after that photo was taken, the blade came down. Leonard Siffleet was executed on that beach, his final moments captured in a single frame that would outlive the war itself, outlive the men who caused it, and outlive an entire generation trying to forget. But this story doesn't end at the sword, because the photograph itself had a journey, one involving American soldiers, a shocking discovery, and a twist involving the very man who swung the blade, a twist that would arrive years later in a courtroom, far from that quiet beach. The sword had fallen, Leonard Siffleet was gone, but the photograph, the single frame capturing his final seconds, was about to begin a journey almost as extraordinary as the war itself. It would cross oceans, survive destruction, and eventually reveal the fate of the very man who held that blade. This is where the story gets even more unbelievable. For nearly 2 years, that photograph sat completely unknown to the world. It existed only inside a Japanese soldier's personal collection, tucked away like a private record of something meant to stay hidden. War produces millions of moments that vanish into silence. This one almost did too. Then in 1944, American forces advanced into Hollandia, New Guinea, overrunning a Japanese base. Soldiers searching through captured belongings stumbled onto photographs, personal snapshots, everyday images. And then one that stopped them cold. A blindfolded man, bound hands, a raised sword, a soldier standing over him in mid-swing. At first, nobody even knew who the kneeling man was. He had no name attached to the photo, no context, no explanation, just a haunting image of an execution frozen in time. For a while, this near-anonymous photograph circulated among American forces simply as evidence of Japanese brutality, a grim symbol without an identity. And that's almost how history remembers him, not as Leonard Siffleet, but as the unknown soldier in the execution photo. But somebody wasn't ready to let him stay nameless. Investigators, using surviving details, uniform fragments, and testimony gathered after the war, slowly pieced together the truth. The blindfolded man was identified as Leonard Siffleet. His story, the radio operator, the secret mission, the betrayal, the capture, began surfacing through military records and survivor accounts. For the first time, the world didn't just see a chilling photograph. They saw a person, a name, a family waiting back in Australia, who had spent months not knowing what happened to their son. Imagine that call. Imagine the moment his family learned not just that he had died, but how the world had seen him die, frozen in a photograph now spreading across newspapers worldwide. The image became one of the most widely published war photographs of the Pacific Campaign, a symbol of the war's hidden cruelty, printed in magazines, shown to the public. forcing people to confront a side of the war that medals and victory speeches never could. But what about the man who swung the sword? This is where the story takes its final, almost cinematic turn. Yasuno Chikao, the officer identified as the executioner, did not disappear into the chaos of war's end. After Japan's surrender, Allied war crimes investigations began combing through incidents just like this one. Testimonies, photographs, and captured documents were used to identify individuals responsible for atrocities against POWs and captured personnel. Chikao was tracked down, arrested, and put on trial for war crimes. Picture that moment, the same man who once stood over a kneeling, blindfolded prisoner on a quiet beach, now standing in a courtroom, facing judges, facing consequences, facing the same word he once had the power to decide for someone else. Guilty or not guilty. Historical records indicate Chikao was tried and convicted for his role in the execution. The sword that once represented unquestioned military authority now meant nothing in front of a war crimes tribunal. The war had flipped the power completely. The man who once held life and death in his hands was now the one waiting for a verdict on his own. This is the brutal irony that makes Siffleet's story so unforgettable. A single photograph didn't just document a tragedy. It became evidence. It became justice. It became one of the reasons the world was forced to reckon with what actually happened in the hidden corners of the Pacific War. Leonard Siffleet never made it home. He never got to live the ordinary life he was born into before the war rewrote his future. But in a strange, haunting way, that photograph gave him something history rarely gives to soldiers who die in secret missions. Far from cameras and headlines, it gave him permanence. It gave him a name. It gave him a story that refuses to be forgotten. Today, his image remains one of the defining photographs of World War II, not because of its violence, but because of what it forces us to feel. The fragile line between fear and dignity, and how even in someone's final seconds, humanity can still shine through the darkest moments history has ever recorded. If this story moved you the way it moved me while researching it, make sure you're subscribed, because dark history like this deserves to be remembered, not buried. Which part of Leonard Siffleet's story hit you the hardest? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.